Straker, un tipo eccentrico sulla cresta dell'onda. Quella che avete visto è una sintesi di Shadow, l'organizzazione finanziata dal Pentagono per la difesa contro gli attacchi di una sconosciuta potenza extraterrestre. E questa è la vera identità di Ed Straker, comandante in capo di Shadow, uomo di ghiaccio, autentico supercervello dell'intera organizzazione, i cui impianti elettronici, altamente perfezionati, sono stati installati nei sotterranei degli stabilimenti cinematografici. La sala controllo radar di base Luna è collegata al comando Shadow a terra via satellite per intercettare e neutralizzare gli attacchi di strani rotori classificati con la sigla UFO, provenienti da un ignoto pianeta. È stato accertato che questa specie di dischi volanti è pilotata da umanoidi. Detti esseri, colpiti da un male inesorabile che li distrugge nel corpo, spinti dalla basilare somiglianza dei caratteri somatici e fisiologici che li accomuna al genere umano, rapiscono i terrestri per procurarsi parti di ricambio atte al trapianto nel disperato tentativo di sopravvivere. Per questo è nata Shadow, per la difesa del genere umano.
Il 26 luglio 2021, un mese dopo l'uscita del rapporto preliminare sugli UFO da parte di una task force voluta dal governo statunitense, viene annunciato il lancio del Galileo Project, voluto dall'astrofisico Avi Loeb, insieme ad altri suoi colleghi dell'Università di Harvard e a diversi collaboratori esterni. Lo scopo primario del progetto è quello della astroarcheologia, ovvero la ricerca di eventuali artefatti extraterrestri. Il progetto si ramifica in due obiettivi principali: sonde attive o relitti tecnologici di civiltà intelligenti vaganti per il nostro sistema solare, in orbite vicine o lontane, come si sospetta essere Oumuamua, in pratica il corrispettivo alieno delle nostre sonde Voyager, Pioneer e New Horizon. E le stesse esotecnologie cercate però molto più vicino a noi, all'interno dei nostri spazi aerei. Il secondo obiettivo sarà avviato per primo, nell'immediato, e sarà quello che andrà a fondo alla questione UFO una volta per tutte, grazie ad una rete di telescopi, videocamere ad alta risoluzione e sensori di ogni tipo, radar infrarossi, e con l'aiuto dell'intelligenza artificiale che elaborerà i gigabyte di dati raccolti e filtrerà le informazioni, escludendo ogni falso positivo. Il primo obiettivo, che rimane il più ambizioso, si avvarrà del nuovo telescopio Vera Rubin in Cile, operativo tra qualche anno. Tutto il mondo ne ha discusso, tranne in Italia, dove, a causa probabilmente del tabù ancora molto forte su questo argomento, neppure nei canali ufficiali dei cosiddetti divulgatori scientifici ne hanno fatto cenno. Avranno i loro buoni motivi. Ce ne faremo una ragione. Unica nota nel bel paese la troviamo in un articolo dell'ANSA Spazio e Astronomia.
We now know from the Kepler satellite data that about half, plus or minus a quarter of all sun-like stars have an Earth-like planet, meaning an Earth-sized planet, roughly at the same separation from the host star. So out of modesty, we should assume that under similar circumstances, we might get similar outcomes in tens of billions of other systems within the Milky Way galaxy. We can no longer ignore the possibility that technological civilizations predated us and that we are not the smartest kid on our cosmic block. Most stars formed billions of years before the sun. We know that by observing star formation in the universe. And therefore, there was enough time for another technological civilization, just one that is more advanced than ours, to fill the Milky Way galaxy with probes, with objects, because 1 billion years is enough time to travel across the Milky Way and basically populate it with artificial intelligence systems that perhaps combined with 3D printers can replicate themselves. And it is time for scientific research on this question of the sky for physical objects. And I call that space archaeology, looking for objects similar to the ones we launched into space. So over the past 4 years, there were 2 intriguing findings in this context. One is Oumuamua, and the other one is unidentified aerial phenomena. And I will touch on both in a few minutes. But a month after the unidentified aerial phenomena report was delivered to Congress, we decided to announce the Galileo Project. It's a scientific, based on non-governmental data that we will assemble as scientists to address the question, are we the smartest kid on our cosmic block? And over the past 2 weeks, I received donations totaling $1.755 million from donors to my research fund at Harvard University, no strings attached. And this is the foundation for the Galileo Project. The hope is to get 10 times more funding to accomplish a rigorous study of our goals. And of course, unidentified objects are a mixed bag, but even if only one of them is of extraterrestrial technological origin, that would have major implications for humanity. And our goal is to have assemble open data and a transparent analysis following physics as we know it. So let me go through some of the latest data that we obtained. And the first one was on October 19th, 2017, an object called Oumuamua, which means in the Hawaiian language.
Okay, here's a question from Duncan Phoenix. He asks, will the process and data collected be publicly available? And have you had any contact with the UAP task force?
Yeah, so we want no access to classified data so that it will not limit our ability to collect our own data. And so at the same time that we're not paying attention to past data that was partly classified, we want to produce data that is completely open to the public, to the scientific community, so that anyone can analyze it. And any analysis that we do will be transparent and publishable in scientific journals. There is no difference between an analysis of objects coming close to Earth from the analysis of objects that are very far away. In both cases, you use telescopes and you are collecting data about light reflected off them or light emitted by them. And this is part of our job as astronomers, looking at things in the sky and figuring out their nature.
And what we will intend to publish, the data could be available to anybody and will be perhaps with a week's delay or so until we've done all the filtering and storing. The interpretations we want to absolutely publish in peer-reviewed scientific journals, as long as these journals are not dogmatically opposed to considering natural or extraterrestrial potential explanations. If the natural explanations, like in Oumuamua, they weren't satisfactory, it wasn't a comet with ice or water ice or methane ice, It could have been a hydrogen ice comet, but that's never been seen in science before. So that's a somewhat speculative natural explanation. Or it could have been an object 1,000th the density of air. We've also cannot imagine how you create a football field, solid structure that way. But, so we intend to publish scientifically, but we also need a scientific community and editors that do not dogmatically reject any potential explanations that are of extraterrestrial technological nature. Alternative physics or science hypotheses. They will have access to the data. They can look at our data transparently, and we will, with great fascination, follow their speculations or theories, what other theories could be out there. We will stick scientifically to known physics, but make the data available agnostically to everybody. Finally, we will just not engage in retroactive attempts to analyze existing images or partial radar or infrared data. So much of that is out there. We will not speculate on prior UAPs, on alleged or real observations or anecdotes or legends, as these are just not conductive to rigorously cross-validated, evidence-based scientific explanations which we are seeking. So that may sound a little bit boring, but we want to stay within our clearly defined limitations, which are still incredibly exciting, and we have a clearly defined scope.
And so we are very fortunate to have assembled just a superb team of scientists that will work with us in analyzing the data. The first task, of course, is to design the instruments that we will use, and that includes telescopes, cameras, and of course, computer systems that will filter out the data, because we will have a huge flood of data coming from the sky by taking a video of the sky. And then we have to identify objects of interest. And that's why we have people with different skills within the team. And I should say that I'm still getting a flood of emails from a lot of young people interested in joining us. And we very much hope to also get more funds, because at the moment, we can definitely demonstrate that we get valuable data, high quality data. But if the funding level would increase by a factor of 10 to the tens of millions of dollars, then we could basically do a comprehensive study of the sky. And so the team, let me go down the list alphabetically, includes Jensine Andresen, Gaspar Bacos, Shelley Cheng, Richard Cloet, Nia Imara, Frank Laukin, whom we heard from, and who helped me found this project, Nick Lowe, Mercedes Lopez Morales, Vikram Ravi, Amir Siraj, Ed Turner, Beatriz Villarreal. So these are the members of the science research team, and we have very distinguished members of the scientific advisory board that I encourage you to find on the Galileo Project website.
Wow, nice to meet you. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we're here in person. This is so cool.
Nice.
Can I shake your hand?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. So what got you interested in science?
Well, I was mostly interested in philosophy at a young age, and I grew up on a farm. I used to collect eggs every afternoon.
Avi Loeb is a Harvard astronomer and author. He's been featured on Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman's podcasts. Those videos have millions of views, and he's also done about 1,000 interviews since that Joe Rogan podcast aired back in January. I wanted to sit down with Avi and talk one-on-one about our place in the universe and if he thinks that we really aren't alone. Is humanity ready for the discovery of an alien civilization?
Probably not, based on the way people react to the report that was delivered to Congress about unidentified objects we don't understand the nature of. And even before that, in 2017, there was an object that came from outside the solar system, given the name Oumuamua, and it didn't look like any of the rocks we've seen before within the solar system. And the possibility that it's artificial in origin, that it came from another technological civilization, is dismissed by most people. And that illustrates to me that many people prefer to close the curtains on our windows and claim that we are unique and special and smart and there is no neighbor out there. But the point is, not looking through our windows does not get rid of our neighbors.
Right, right. So you don't think we're alone in the universe?
Probably not, because I believe in modesty, that we are nothing special. In fact, half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation, and most of the stars from billions of years before the sun. So it's very likely that there was a civilization like ours, or even more advanced, that predated us. And they sent equipment into space, just like we are sending, and that equipment could have reached us a long time ago.
Tell me about the Galileo Project and some of your main objectives.
Yeah, so we want to search for equipment sent by other civilizations, and it could be artificial intelligence, it could be very smart, just like kids that we educate at a young age, give them guidelines for how to get engaged with the world, and then send them off, and they act autonomously. So you can imagine probes being sent from an advanced civilization a long time ago that reached every habitable planet within the Milky Way galaxy, including our own. And the only way to find out if that is the reality that we live in is to look out. And so the Galileo Project aims to place telescopes that survey the sky, and if they see anything unusual that doesn't look like a bird or an airplane or a drone, then the telescopes will take a close-up look at those and maybe get a megapixel image, a high-resolution photograph of objects that in the past were claimed to be unidentified in the report to Congress, for example.
Right.
And so we want to really identify their nature. And if we can read off the label on them, it could say made in country X here on Earth, or it could say made on exoplanet Y somewhere else. We want to figure it out.
What if you don't find anything?
Well, that's also useful because at the moment, a lot of high-level officials, such as former CIA directors Brennan and Woolsey, former President Barack Obama, talked seriously about these objects being real but unidentified. We can clear up the fog using the scientific method. So far, no scientists try to do that. And that's unfortunate because it leaves the public with need to speculate about what these objects might be. Of course, if we find that they were produced by another nation, that would be a matter of national security. And the fact that the intelligence agencies came to Congress and said, we don't know what some of the objects we see in our sky are, that's an admission of their failure because they are getting paid to do that. And so I think this subject needs to move from the realm of national security advisors or politicians or military personnel to the realm of science, where we can get high quality images and data on the same objects we see on the sky. It's just like astronomy. In astronomy, we're trying to look at objects very far away in the sky by using telescopes. Here we're using telescopes to monitor objects that are much closer to us. And in a way, you're using telescopes in both cases, but you're focusing on other things. And I think it could be just part of the mainstream in science, trying to figure out the nature of objects that are close to us to see if any of them is of extraterrestrial technological origin, because that would have a huge impact on our society if we do find one. And just one. It's possible that it's a mixed bag and most objects have a simple, mundane explanation, but if we find one that is extraterrestrial, that would have a huge impact. And, you know, we never know. It's like a fishing expedition. You go out, you throw your hook, and let's see what kind of fish we will find. The beauty of science is that it provides the privilege of maintaining your childhood curiosity, and I take full advantage of that. We want to get new data, not obsess with past reports, many of which were based on eyewitnesses. In the courtroom, of course, it's enough to have corroborating evidence delivered by eyewitnesses to put a person in jail. But in science, that's not enough. You cannot write a scientific paper saying someone said this and that. You have to use instruments that collect quantitative data, and only that can be used as scientific evidence. And science is about reproducibility of results. You should be able to get evidence again and again under similar circumstances. And so the idea is to look at the sky for the first time with new telescopes and see what we find. The reason we call it the Galileo Project is because at his time, Galileo Galilei looked through his telescope and realized that most likely the Earth moves around the sun. But the philosophers at the time said that they know the truth. The truth is that the sun moves around the Earth, that we are at the center of the world, and they refused to look through his telescope. And the idea of our project is that we should not make this mistake again.
Right.
We should not have a prejudice about whether we are alone, whether we are the smartest kid on the block. We should just check our sky and see if there is any technological equipment out there.
What about Oumuamua speaks to you that, there is something here and this isn't a false positive?
Right, so in 2017, the first object from outside the solar system was spotted near Earth. And it didn't look like the rocks we have seen before from within the solar system. It wasn't a comet because it didn't have gas or dust around it. Comets have cometary tail usually. And it didn't look like an asteroid, just a rock, because it had a very extreme shape. As it was tumbling, the amount of light that it reflected changed by a factor of 10, and its shape was most likely flat based on the way that it reflected light, and then it was pushed away from the sun by some excess force. And my point is, if we've never seen them, then why not also contemplate the possibility of an artificial origin? And in fact, in September 2020, there was another object found. It was given the name 2020 SO, and it was also pushed away from the sun without a cometary tail. And then it was realized that this is actually a rocket booster that was launched in 1966 from Earth. And it had very thin walls, and that's why it had a lot of area for its mass, so it could have been pushed by reflecting sunlight. So here you have it, an object behaving like Oumuamua, which we know is artificial because we produced it. But it was not a sail, it was just a thin object. And that led me to think that maybe Oumuamua was thin, not for the purpose of behaving like a light sail, but maybe for another purpose. For example, it could have been a receiver that is trying to collect signals from probes that are out there, like these UAP that are being talked about. And maybe that was the purpose of this, but we don't know. And the best way to learn more about objects like Oumuamua is to look for more of the same, new objects that come along, and we will find more in the coming years. For example, with the Vera Rubin Observatory that will come online in 2 years, we could find one every month or so. And then if we find one that is approaching us, we can send a spacecraft equipped with a camera that will take a close-up photograph. Because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I wouldn't need to write a book if we had a high-resolution image.
What would it mean to find something and to verify, okay, we're not alone?
I think it's very simple. We just need a megapixel image
Right.
of an object so that we can realize that it's not a rock, it's not some aerial phenomena in the atmosphere, it's not something natural.
Right.
Because you can see the bolts on it, you can see that it's a piece of a technological equipment. And we can tell the difference. And I think when that image is obtained, at that point, everyone would subscribe to the notion that there must be something out there that perhaps is more intelligent than we are. And that something is not in contact with us necessarily, but we find its relics. And it's just like walking on the beach. Most of the time you see rocks that were naturally produced These are like the comets or the asteroids that we have seen in the solar system.
Right.
But every now and then you see a plastic bottle that tells you that a civilization is out there.
I'm sure you get a lot of, the controversy about this and maybe some criticism. How do you deal with that, and how do you keep just pushing forward? And you're so, vocal and obviously dedicated to this.
Well, I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter. That's for one thing. I told my team members the other day that let's keep our eyes on the ball, not on the audience. Because it's very easy to get distracted, either by positive comments or negative comments. I should say I was very surprised that a few days after the announcement publicly that the project exists,
right,
I got thousands of emails from people willing to contribute, either financially or in terms of their time to the project. So there was a huge response. And the project itself is funded by private donations that arrived at my doorstep through research funds that I got at Harvard University from people that I didn't know before. And so over a period of 2 weeks, I got almost $2 million from donations.
Okay.
And so it was all a result of people being inspired by this vision of searching for relics of other civilizations, which is sort of like archaeology. You're not establishing contact with the civilization, the culture that you're looking for, but you're finding relics that they left behind.
And learning so much, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah, we could potentially see a technology that represents our future.
Right.
So it could be very beneficial financially. You can imagine entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley realizing here is something that we can use for daily life that could.
I think I want to jump right in and bring our guest, Avi Loeb, Harvard, Avi Loeb, in to talk about the Galileo Project. And also, Mark, how are you guys?
Thanks for having us.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah, Avi, you have done 1,100 interviews. And you were on with, I was on the same podcast the week before with Chad and Bob. Really fun guys. And they were hilarious talking to you. They dared to ask really silly questions like, is Bigfoot next?
Well, I don't think there are silly questions. Usually there are silly answers. But,
yeah, that's true. Yeah. But one of the things, I know it was a while since you were on, but one of the things I really, really like your approach, because it's how all things really are created in the world. If you think about it, you have to act like a child with an imagination. And I was watching something on the creative brain, it was called something like that, a documentary, and how people have to think so outside of the box. And one of the architects there said, hey, picture the Empire State Building. Just picture it. It's always been there as far as we know, but someone had to think that up. Someone had to think that design up. It always starts from a thought. Everything starts from a thought and imagination.
And some defenders of science are actually hurting it because they're not paying attention to unusual evidence, and unconventional ideas eventually become conventional. Look at the lab leak theory about COVID. A year ago, it was laughed at. And now the Biden administration is about to get a report any minute about it as a serious matter. And it just illustrates that we should be guided by evidence. We should keep our eyes on the ball, not on the audience.
Right. And I heard you say that on their podcast. I'm wearing Neil deGrasse Tyson's shirt. It's all Stardust. A very good close friend of mine gave this to me. But and I heard what you said. And I've given him a little bit of criticism because of the way he treats the UFO topic with such ridicule. And basically, I like what you said. You said he is addressing an audience, not science.
Right. He cares a lot about the number of likes he gets on Twitter. And the point is that, that's not the way science should be guided. Science should be guided by evidence. And, especially when you see something unusual, it should be intriguing. You should be excited by it rather than ridiculing it because you want to stay in your comfort zone. That's the wrong attitude. And I think anyone that is used to making discoveries in science or innovating and taking risks, would admit that you must allow for the evidence to guide you rather than assuming that you know the answer in advance, because then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will not collect the data that would allow you to learn something new. And that's a very simple idea. Nevertheless, people have a hard time accepting it, starting from the philosophers during the days of Galileo that refused to look through his telescope because they knew that the sun moves around the earth. And, even a month ago, there was an article in Nature Astronomy magazine by a philosopher arguing that Oumuamua, this strange object that was discovered in 2017, didn't look like a comet or an asteroid. That strange object must be natural, he said, this philosopher. And I thought to myself, haven't we learned something over the past 4 centuries?
Right. Now, I'm going to have Mark ask you like the real nitty gritty of the Galileo project as far as the technology. Mark has actually worked on for a number of years on something, I don't want to say similar, but he knows enough to ask the right questions. But before that, I just wanted to address one quick thing, and that I was kind of surprised to see that Seth Shostak from SETI was part of the team. Seth Shostak is also someone that ridicules the idea of UFOs, the possibility that they could be extraterrestrial. Here on the show, I never say that I know they're extraterrestrial because I don't. But he just, even the thought of it, he just goes,
So apparently he changed his attitude by 180 degrees because he wrote a Scientific American article where he supports the Galileo Project. Now, he's not a member of the research team. He's a member of the Scientific Advisory Board. And, we in the research team are following a path that we can talk about that involves selecting instruments and then testing them and eventually taking data. He's more of an advisory in an advisory capacity. And right now he's quite supportive of what we are doing. So that illustrates the fact that, people can change their views and you shouldn't pay too much attention to what they say. You should be guided by the desire to get more data, more evidence.
Yeah, and I know funding's a big part of that. And that's always something he's afraid of. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But Mark, do you have a question for Avi?
Yeah, well, actually, it's great to see you again, Avi. When we were, in the past few months, I implemented a remote observatory out in the Arizona desert, and I run it from here. I'm in Connecticut, so it's 2,500 miles away. I can access it and work with it, take imagery and so forth. It's a wide-angle view, so I get like a 2-degree field, so it's kind of interesting. And that telescope behind me right there is actually for this observatory here in Connecticut. We're making a new building, so we have 2 that are going to run on East and West Coast, right? So my question becomes, what types of instrumentation are you planning to use for Galileo?
Right. So we plan to have each telescope system will have a few telescopes so that we can get a parallax. In other words, see the object from different directions to map its motion in 3 dimensions. So those telescopes may not have high resolution. They would potentially be able to resolve a feature the size of a cell phone on an object at a distance of a mile. That roughly would be the resolution. And that would allow us to track the motion of unusual objects. Of course, if it looks like a bird, then we don't care too much about it. If it looks like a drone or an airplane, we also don't care about it. Anything that is human-made would be for us as boring as a bird. Right. And I'm sure there are residents of Washington, D.C. that would care a lot about an object that says made in China, made in Russia. But for us, it's not really exciting. And what we would look for are other types of objects. Now, in order to be able to get a higher resolution image, we will need a bigger telescope within that system. But all the data will be fed to state-of-the-art cameras that we are starting to test now. And then the key is really the computer system that will filter objects of interest out of the data stream. It will be a huge data stream that we can't store. But once we identify an object of interest, we'll track it and collect data on it, both from reflected sunlight during the day or from infrared emission during the night and day by the object. If an object moves faster than sound in air, it should heat up. We know it from supersonic airplanes. We know it from the space shuttle. They both got heated up by hundreds of degrees, and that kind of temperature emits in the infrared, and you can see it at night, this glow, this heat. And then, of course, we'll have radar systems and look for radio reflection or emission by the objects of interest. And altogether, we want to use multiple wavelengths, and so that we can verify that it's a real object, and it's not a phenomenon in the atmosphere. It's not some weather pattern. And that will take some time for us to build the software and to put together a set of instruments that we buy off the shelf, so that it performs to our satisfaction. Once we have such a system in place, then we will produce copies of it. And the number of copies that we produce depends on the level of funding. So as of now, I received over the past month donations, commitments for donations at the level of up to $2 million. And that would allow us to have perhaps 10 such systems. That's not enough. We did some calculations about the statistics of UAP reports, and we need more like 100 or hundreds of such systems. So it's very good that you have one or two, but the point is it really needs to be hundreds in order to cover enough of the sky and have a high likelihood of seeing something of the type that was reported to Congress. And we hope to get funded at a level that is 10 times bigger than we currently are. And that's the origin for this crowdfunding that we started. We hope to get up to $10 million, $20 million, and then we can do a comprehensive study. And definitely the data will be open to the public. Everyone would be able to use it and analyze it. So there will be nothing hidden. And the instruments that we will use will all be under full control. There will not be like a camera in a jittery cockpit of a fighter jet, you know.
Right. There'll be control systems that can target specific locations.
Yeah, and you might ask why astronomical observatories that exist right now that are looking at the sky never report about UAP. Well, the answer is simple. If there is a bird flying above a telescope, astronomers ignore it. But we will monitor it. We will track it.
Well, the other thing is, too, that usually those observatories are not wide-angle observatories. They're actually just like a pencil point in the sky, right? So they're only looking at narrow ranges. And so the likelihood of something passing through is very unlikely. If you put a cork in a bathtub and look through a straw and try to find the cork, you may never find it.
Right.
No, because
you see, that's exactly the reason that we decided after 70 years of people reporting about unusual objects, you know, and it may well be a mixed bag. Maybe most reports have some mundane explanations, you know, but we are sending our hooks, and whatever fish we find, it's like a fishing expedition. We don't assume anything, and we will report back whatever we find. And maybe we will not find any interesting fish, but maybe we will, and we shouldn't assume anything.
Yeah, see, I was working and still do with Douglas Trumbull, visual effects guy, and he and I were working on a project called the Aerial Anomaly Detection System. And of course, it was all about funding. We could not get the funding because when people heard the word UFO, they just ran the other way. You know, so basically we had to change it to Aerial Anomaly Detection System. We just did that. So who knows what will happen? But it's a series of platters with instrumentation, because I think if you can look in the sky, in a broad view of the sky, all right, you should be able to detect something. And we put them at various distances from each other, laid out in threes, for instance, so they can triangulate positions overhead. Sounds a similar thing to Galileo.
Yes.
But ours might be movable. They might be little platters that can actually be moved to different locations. And then you just get that GPS coordinate for that exact location, and the other system will know it. And then you can triangulate to a pretty good degree.
Yeah, so we should learn from your experience. That would be interesting for us to learn. But I should say that the reason we have funding is simply because a number of donors came to the porch of my home and contacted me. These are people that I haven't met more than a month ago. They just read my book, Extraterrestrial. They were intrigued by all the interviews that I gave, and they had questions, and then they decided that they are inspired by the vision. And it's interesting that the funding came from the private sector, you know, from individuals that really care about this question. And it's not as if this research will take away money from existing programs like the search for dark matter. So I think the science community should support it, because we're not taking funds away from anything that is done right now. We are actually adding funds. And moreover, we're looking for evidence. What else can be better for science than data? And it just strikes me as strange if seeing some scientists still pushing back against this project.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the reticence to move forward with this type of thinking, you know, it goes back to when I was getting my astronomy degree. I talked to the director of my observatory, and I told him that I believe it's a populated universe. That's what I told him. And he looked at me and he laughed at me and said, "Come on, get back in the observatory, leave Captain Kirk to us." That's what he said to me exactly.
Well, you know, that was my experience as a kid. That was the thing that I remember the most. When I was a kid, I used to sit at dinner with adults, and I would ask a difficult question. And the adults in the room would pretend that they know much more than they actually know. That was response number one. And the second response was, when they didn't have a good answer, they would simply dismiss the question. And I must say that as a senior scientist, I have a very similar feeling. And that bothers me, because science is supposed to be open-minded and based on evidence. And, it's exactly the same feeling as when I was a kid. And I will never surrender for that kind of an approach. I mean, it makes little sense. The only way for us to learn something new is not to surrender to this pretension by the adults in the room, so to speak, because they don't really know what they're talking about.
I get accused all the time of being, sorry, Martin, I'll let you go in a second. Sorry, I apologize. It's your show. I get accused all the time of being someone who believes extraterrestrial life is out there. And okay, accuse me. I believe it is. I have no doubt. And I'm actually one of the few, I think, that I really don't have any arrogance about this. Science can be arrogant, as you know. Right. And that's because they have a feeling of for what they feel is right. They know what they have, their dogma, their unabashed attention to their detail and their concepts.
Well, your approach is the modest approach, to assume that we exist, conditions of so many tens of billions of planets are similar in terms of surface temperature to that on Earth. And why should we assume that we are special and unique? Why should we assume that the play is about us, that we are the central actors? We might be just like an ant among many ants on the sidewalk of the Milky Way galaxy, And I think that is the modest approach. So everyone else that claims otherwise is arrogant.
And they're arrogant. The arrogance of science has always bothered me, and I just determined I will never be that guy. Stay open-minded. Yes, you might be wrong, but you know what? Be okay being wrong, right? I'm okay being disproven. That's fine.
Yeah, but if we collect evidence, there is nothing bad that can come out of it. Anyone that says, let's not collect evidence, is behaving just like those philosophers that refuse to look through the telescope of Galileo. And that's why we called it the Galileo Project.
That's a very good name. I like that name too, by the way. Yeah. That's a beautiful name for it. That's my son's middle name, by the way.
And if Galileo was around, he would be a honorary member of our group.
I bet he would. My son Gabe, his middle name is Galileo.
But by the way, he would have been canceled on social media today. I'm pretty sure about that.
He would.
Is humanity ready for such a discovery?
No. I think most people prefer to stay in their comfort zone and basically believe that we are unique and special because that flatters our ego. And it reminds me of my daughters when they were young and they were at home, they tended to think that they're the smartest in the world. And when we took them to the kindergarten on the first day at school, they had a psychological shock because they met kids that might be smarter than they are. And of course, if I were to ask them, they would say that they prefer to stay at home to maintain their illusion. So for that reason alone, I think that most people prefer to believe that we are unique and special. But it makes no sense to ignore reality because then you are not accommodating properly. And guess what? One day, a smart neighbor will knock on your door and it will be too late.
Base Alfa chiama Terra. Base Alfa chiama Terra. Questa è la nostra ultima trasmissione alla gente del pianeta Terra. Ci siamo imbattuti in un'intensa perturbazione gravitazionale che ha catapultato la nostra in questo sistema solare totalmente sconosciuto. I sensori indicavano la presenza di un pianeta abitabile, ma sarebbe stato alla nostra portata per soli 6 giorni. Un tempo insufficiente per determinare i rischi a lungo termine di un trasferimento sulla sua superficie. All'unanimità è stata presa la dolorosa decisione di abbandonare Alfa. Lo scopo di questa trasmissione è di informare coloro che sanno della nostra esistenza e non sanno della nostra fine. Ma il messaggio è diretto anche a coloro che sulla Terra non ci conoscono. Persone che non abbiamo mai conosciuto e che noi consideriamo familiari. Siamo tutti alieni fino a quando non impariamo a conoscerci l'un l'altro. Mentre parlo, il comandante e gli altri hanno iniziato le procedure di insediamento sul nostro nuovo mondo, Terra. Un'ultima aquila mi sta aspettando. Sarò l'ultima persona ad abbandonare la base. Presto il pianeta sarà fuori portata. Noi non sappiamo se riceverete questo messaggio e non sappiamo se sia sopravvissuto il ricordo di chi eravamo e di quali fossero i nostri propositi e del disastro che ci ha condotti in questo viaggio nelle infinite vastità dello spazio e del tempo. Per noi è stato un tempo di pericoli scampati, di conoscenze rivelate, di misteriosi incontri e percezioni alterate, nella crescente convinzione che vi sia un fine più alto in quello di cui siamo stati testimoni. Questi lunghi anni hanno messo a dura prova la nostra volontà di sopravvivere come individui e come comunità, costringendoci a una grande prova, la lotta per mantenersi fedeli a un'unica primogenitura. Ma questo è il passato, poiché ora ci attende una sfida ancora più difficile. Vogliamo che tutti voi sappiate che noi, gli abitanti della base Alfa, siamo esistiti. La nostra presenza, la conoscenza della Terra e dei suoi abitanti, la loro forza, la fragilità, il potere e l'arroganza, il genio e anche la futilità, hanno lasciato un'impronta in questo vasto universo che condividiamo con tante altre razze ed esseri viventi. Inoltre noi siamo convinti che la nostra Odissea ha avuto un suo scopo, anche se deve ancora rivelarsi appieno. È arrivato il momento di concludere questo messaggio e di affrontare le incertezze e le grandi sfide della vita sul nostro nuovo mondo.
Paradossalmente, l'intera spiegazione fatta in questo video di Adrian Fartade è ottima sia per chi vede sempre e ovunque alieni, ma anche per chi non vuole proprio concedere neppure una minima probabilità che lo siano. Il ragionamento è perfettamente intercambiabile ed è quello che sta alla base dell'esperimento con il gorilla sulla cecità percettiva.
Quello che voglio dire è che davanti a questo tipo di fenomeni abbiamo un sacco di spiegazioni terrestri da cui pescare prima di dover ricorrere a quelle extraterrestri.
Esatto, ci sono tante spiegazioni terrestri. Perché dovrei rompermi la testa con spiegazioni alternative e strambe? Meglio starsene nella comfort zone e seguire la regola del rasoio di Occam, senza sbattermi più di tanto per cercare altre spiegazioni.
Perché sappiamo con certezza che molti oggetti volanti nell'atmosfera terrestre, ma anche fenomeni che possono avvenire nell'atmosfera, possono essere fraintesi e visti come oggetti volanti non identificati di questo tipo. Per cui è facile poi farsi suggestionare, e questa è la seconda cosa più importante, e pensare che la spiegazione più probabile sia quella che il tuo cervello ti suggerisce per abitudine, per cultura, per l'idea generale che ti sei fatto di quello che vedi, e quindi questa cosa non succedeva prima del fenomeno degli alieni per come lo interpretiamo oggi grazie al cinema, quindi è bello vedere come l'effetto culturale sia diventato così forte da farci pensare per prima cosa agli alieni.
Giusto, ma di contro si potrebbe allora dire in egual maniera che se parti dal presupposto che non è possibile che siano alieni, che per la fisica che conosciamo non è possibile coprire distanze interstellari in tempi accettabili per noi umani, e che sicuramente ci sarà sempre una spiegazione terrestre. Allo stesso modo si potrebbe non giungere mai alla verità.
Nessuno ha colpa di essere suggestionato, è nella nostra natura. Ma una volta che dobbiamo fare delle decisioni, dobbiamo prendere delle decisioni, dobbiamo partire usando la logica, scienza, il metodo. Ed è qui che cambia il modo di interpretarle tra ufologia e scienza. Fondamentalmente si tratta di questo, del modo in cui ci si approccia al problema, non al fatto di studiare UFO e chiedersi se ci sono alieni, ma il modo in cui ti approcci. Se parti dal presupposto che qualsiasi cosa sia un puntino che si muove strano deve essere alieno, è difficile iniziare a fare un'indagine perché stai già concludendo prima di esaminare qualsiasi prova.
Alla stessa maniera, se io vedrò in un eventuale UFO reale sempre solo aerei, piccioni, palloni sonda, droni e lanterne cinesi, proprio perché fanno parte ormai della nostra cultura, allora vedrò sempre solo quelli.
Ci sono piloti, ci sono anche astronauti che hanno parlato di UFO e di alieni e è facile pensare che, l'ha detto qualcuno che fa il pilota che è un alieno, quindi sarà palesemente un alieno, perché lui se ne intende. Però di nuovo, non è la prima volta che qualcuno è rimasto suggestionato e sappiamo che può succedere, gli esseri umani sono così. Quindi è facile chiedersi, ok, allora sono tutti suggestionati? Che cos'è? Una suggestione collettiva? Sì, si chiama cultura. È così che funziona. Lo so, non è soddisfacente come spiegazione perché tutti noi vogliamo che siano alieni.
Sì, caro Adrian, il tuo ragionamento è valido e non fa una grinza. L'unico difetto sulla tua argomentazione, riguardo la cultura e su come influenzi la realtà, sta nel fatto che potresti aver scambiato la causa con l'effetto. Parli di cinema che ha condizionato le menti delle persone, ma chi ha influenzato gli autori di quei film? Chi ha ispirato le prime descrizioni di UFO e di alieni nella storia umana? Perché devo scomodarmi ad immaginare navi aliene quando dovrei essere stato condizionato da mongolfiere e dirigibili, molto più vecchi dei primi voli aerei e nello spazio?
È arrivata la notizia che l'aeroporto di Milano Malpensa verso le 7 di sera è stato bloccato da un oggetto volante non identificato e tutti mi hanno confermato che l'oggetto volante che si è piazzato a 5 km, praticamente all'inizio del sentiero di atterraggio, o a metà, a 5 km dall'aeroporto, non era né un drone né un elicottero. Non tutti sanno che vicino a Malpensa c'è la base militare di Cameri. Diciamo che se a Cameri si fosse alzato un aereo per uno scramble avrebbe avuto tutto il tempo di controllare che oggetto era, ma non hanno fatto alzare nessun velivolo. E questo perché sicuramente hanno capito che non era un oggetto terrestre, altrimenti avrebbero fatto uno scramble. Quell'oggetto lì, tutti i miei colleghi che ho chiamato hanno detto che non era un drone e non era un elicottero. Quindi abbiamo appurato che era un oggetto volante non identificato che ha bloccato l'aeroporto di Milano Malpensa per 40 minuti abbondanti, dirottando 7 voli. Quindi signori, voi dovete darvi una regolata, perché dopo è inutile alla mattina far andare l'esercito, fare le battute nel campo carristi per vedere se qualcuno aveva fatto alzare un pallone sonda, perché anche il personale che lavora in una ditta di vicino aerospaziale, che ha dichiarato apertamente che quello era un oggetto volante non identificato, e tutti gli organi di stampa che si stanno prestando a disconoscere questa cosa sono dei coglioni. Denunciatemi pure, siete dei coglioni. Perché state violando un diritto fondamentale all'informazione della popolazione. Questa notizia l'hanno battuta 2 o 3 testate in maniera ineccepibile, qua del posto, le nostre testate locali, e adesso sta correndo una disinformazione galoppante per dire che era un elicottero senza permesso di volo. È impossibile che un elicottero si metta su... Qual è il pilota coglione che si mette con l'elicottero fermo 40 minuti sul sentiero di atterraggio di un aeroporto internazionale? Porca puttana! Il fatto che l'oggetto l'hanno rilevato i militari è accertato al 100% per una cosa. Se era un elicottero senza piano di volo, col trasponder acceso, i controllori di volo avrebbero avuto il numero identificativo dell'elicottero e della macchina. Ma se aveva il trasponder spento, la torre di Malpensa non ha più radar attivi, come hanno fatto a vederlo sul radar? Non l'hanno visto. Loro l'hanno visto lì, a vista. perché il pilota arriva, dice oggetto davanti a me, la torre, il controllore guarda fuori dalla torre, a 5 km lo vede lì, dice mo? Guarda sul radar, dice vabbè, diciamo che è apparso sul radar, ma pensa, non ha più radar attivi. Se quell'oggetto è apparso sul radar, è apparso sul radar militare. Siete ridicoli e ne pagherete le conseguenze. A me fa piacere che continuate a fare disinformazione in questo modo.
Innanzitutto un po' di riscaldamento visivo. Io ti mostro una carta, tu mi dici il seme. Andrò sempre più veloce. Voglio vedere se sei in grado di tenere il passo. Ok. Quadri. Fiori. Picche. Cuori. Quadri. Picche. Quadri. Cuori. Fiori. Picche. Cuori. Quadri. Fiori. Cuori. Picche. Quadri. Fiori. Picche. Cuori. Fiori. Picche, cuori. Promosso? No. Ma in pochi ci riescono. Cuori neri, picche rosse. Andiamo, mi ha imbrogliato. Ah, l'esperienza ti ha condizionato a pensare che tutti i cuori siano rossi e tutte le picche debbano essere nere. Le forme sono simili, quindi per la tua mente è facile recepirli sulla base delle esperienze passate, piuttosto che aprirti all'idea che potrebbero essere diversi. Vediamo quello che ci aspettiamo di vedere, non necessariamente che cosa c'è in realtà. Non è un caso che i bambini che non hanno mai giocato a carte superino sempre il test. E allora ci chiediamo quante altre cose ci siano proprio di fronte a noi, segni, suoni, profumi che non riusciamo a sentire solo perché non ci siamo abituati. Sì, è un bel trucchetto, ma non esistono giochi di carte con picche rosse e cuori neri. E chi può dirlo?
Ma poi mi chiedo, se la maggior parte degli astronomi e cosmologi sono convinti di questo, sicuri che non ci possa essere una scienza diversa, una tecnologia più avanzata della nostra, anche solo di qualche millennio, a cosa serve continuare la ricerca? Non sarà piuttosto una questione di ego? Quello che ci fa rigettare l'idea che altre civiltà siano più avanti di noi e magari più intelligenti, come suggerisce anche il professor Loeb? Ma forse il problema dei debunker sta proprio invece nel fatto che non vogliono che siano alieni. Se poi a questo aggiungiamo che le indagini dei debunker si limitano ad ispezionare la psiche dei testimoni e a cercare sempre difetti nelle strumentazioni che hanno rilevato l'UFO, si evince che non saranno mai veramente neppure UFO, ma oggetti convenzionali terrestri o al massimo fenomeni meteo, altro che alieni. Curiosamente, in alcune ricerche indipendenti condotte tra vari utenti sui social, che erano allineati al pensiero dei negazionisti, nessuno comunque sperava o si augurava che fossero alieni. Voglio dire, un conto sono le probabilità su cosa questi WAP possano essere, ma tutt'altra cosa è sperare che non lo siano. Sembra quasi che la maggior parte di questi utenti abbiano atteggiamenti nei confronti dell'argomento quasi di timore, ripudio verso quell'idea, un atteggiamento direi antropocentrico, come se avessero paura di perdere una qualche posizione privilegiata o chissà che altro, se non addirittura xenofobia, o nello specifico xenoestrudo.
Cosa c'entra l'effetto gorilla con la ricerca di vita aliena nell'universo? Bene, un team di neuropsicologi guidati da Gabriel Della Torre e Manuel Garcia si è chiesto: non è che mentre continuiamo a cercarli, gli alieni sono tutti quanti lì, sotto il nostro naso, come appunto tanti gorilla invisibili? Quando pensiamo ad altri esseri intelligenti, ci dicono Della Torre e Manuel Garcia, tendiamo a vederli attraverso il nostro setaccio percettivo, ma siamo limitati dalla nostra visione del mondo. Una cosa difficile da ammettere. Quello che stiamo cercando di fare è contemplare altre possibilità. Come vedete, approfondendo l'argomento si va oltre gli omini verdi con le antenne sulla testa. Ormai la nostra fantasia è a un limite. La complessità dell'universo e la limitatezza delle nostre conoscenze.
A year ago, the Pentagon officially released 3 videos that were already circulating online. The videos were from 2004 and 2015, and they showed unidentified objects on radar performing in uncharacteristic ways. The director of national intelligence has just declassified a 9-page report that is a preliminary assessment of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, what we all used to call UFOs. Of the 144 UAP reports between 2004 and 2021, only one was identified in high confidence. The other 143 are still mysterious. What did you think of the key findings of that report?
Well, I've read that report, and 2 years ago, in a classified setting in the Senate Armed Services Committee, I talked to the pilots, and they are absolutely convinced that they saw something. They locked their radar onto it, they followed it, and then all of a sudden it would move. And it had no exhaust, it had no plume, it had no visible wings or any kind of engines. So we don't know what it is, but it's something, because as you mentioned, over 140 sightings, and maybe a couple of dozen that are really very specific sightings by very credible sources. And so what is it? We don't know. NASA has a program searching for life in the universe. It's called space astrobiology. We're looking for signs of life on Mars. We're looking in the project that's going to Venus now to see is there life in that atmosphere. We also listen in the universe. We have a grant program for people listening in the universe for any kind of intelligent signal. So we don't know what this phenomenon is, but we sure need to find out.
According to the report, more, quote, scientific knowledge may be needed to understand some of the objects. The report reads, quote, "We would group such objects in this category pending scientific advances that allow us to better understand them." Senator, they're saying that our science is not good enough to understand the phenomena that was observed. I know you say we don't know what it is, but what do you think it is?
Well, I don't know. I hope it's not an adversary here on Earth, because then they have technology, if that's the case, that we do not have. But the answer to your question is, I do not know.
Do you believe there's life in another part of the universe?
I sure do, and let me tell you why. The universe is 13.5 billion years old. We're even finding now other suns that very likely have planets that we call exoplanets circulating around, and we're looking for signs of one with a habitable atmosphere that would duplicate what we have in our solar system with planet Earth. And so do I think in a universe that is so big that there is another sun in another galaxy, that sun has planets revolving around it? You bet I believe that. And very likely, if there is, the chemical composition as all those gases amassed around and form the planets, the chemical composition could produce life, and that's what we're exploring.
Does NASA have a plan, Senator, for what it would do should a UAP turn out to be a space alien?
No, but the first thing we'd want to do is to find out if it's friend or foe. But we're not to that point because we just don't know what this phenomenon is. I think with all those sightings that you referenced, there's something there. This is not an optical illusion or a radar blip that's a mistake. When you talk to those Navy pilots, they're convinced because they saw it and they tracked it.
Senator, of course, one of the possibilities is that this is a foreign adversary's advanced technology, or perhaps our own advanced technology that is highly classified. What is the probability that that's what this is?
Well, I hope it's ours. That is highly secret because this kind of propulsion that has no wings and doesn't have an exhaust and suddenly darts from here to there in an instant, covering a distance at speeds that are incredible. I hope it's ours, but according to our government, they're telling us it is not.
Well, then you can understand the curiosity that we're out looking for other life. We believe it's there. We have unidentified objects flying in our own airspace, but we don't have a plan for aliens?
Well, I had a wonderful plan when I watched Steven Spielberg's E.T., and he was a friendly little fella, but we just don't know. We don't know what this phenomenon is.
All right. Given what we know about the UAPs, when is the right time, Senator, for us to come up with a plan to handle intelligent life that we're looking for?
Well, we better identify it first, and once we identify it, then we'll know what to do. We don't have any idea if suddenly an alien is going to appear. This is still great speculation. But we're in the search for life out there, and this phenomenon that these Navy pilots have seen, let's find out about it. What is it? And then we can deal with it.
For all the contingency plans that the U.S. government has on every shelf and every binder, I would think that we would be more prepared for that possible eventuality than you say that we are.
It is what it is.